I'll share something that Amos Chacham says about this. In weeks past, I mentioned that technically speaking, the door Hamidbar, those who left the desert, those who left Egypt, and the decree was upon them that, you know what, they're going to have to stay in that desert and they would die there. They would not merit to enter the land of Israel. So that's less of a punishment, more like God giving them what they asked for. You want to stay in the Chutz La'aretz, you don't want to sell the land of Israel, so that's what you're going to get. Okay. Eventually, so basically the way I was understanding it's less of a punishment. And sometimes, by the way, most of God's punishments are like that. It's less of a punishment and more like you just get what you deserve. You jump in front of a truck, you are going to get clobbered by that truck. It's not that God's punishing you. That's just how this works. If you don't keep the Torah, you're going to get clobbered by nature. You walk with me happenstance. It means you don't care about God. Everything you do is entirely godless. You don't believe in God's providence. You ignore God and his commandments. So God will ignore you. He'll leave you to the whims of this world, to the circumstances, the natural circumstances that are here, and you'll be devoured by the nations. That's basically what happens. It says in Tehillim, the Psalm 106, I'll read it here. It says that they rejected the desirable land. Lo ha'aminu lidvaro. They did not believe his word. By the way, this is basically the Moroccan Shitas Rabbi Lichtenstein here. We are not, as he says, we're not supposed to take on these irrational tasks of conquering Gaza and settlement. That's what they said. So what happens? They had a tumult in their tents. Does a Torah milchama require a melech, or Yachid also has a din milchama? I'll address that question next. Okay, so that's basically Moshe Rabbeinu's words. Okay, you were quarreling in your tents. There was discussions about how to react to the report of the Raglim. Lo shamu b'kol Adonai. They did not heed the voice of God. He raised his hand to them, meaning like this, take an oath, to drop them or make them die in the wilderness. And also to allow their seed to fall into the hands of the Gentiles, and to disperse them among the lands. Basically, we're telling you exile. This is the source, as he points out, for the idea in Chazal that even though if you're reading Sefer Bamidbar or Sefer Devarim, Moshe Rabbeinu says the divine decree in response to this act of the Meraglim and the people's reaction to that was that this generation would have to die out in the desert. That's what's there. The idea that this would also become the day for the exile, that is Tisha B'Av, would mark the beginning of the first exile and the second exile. That's not explicit in the Torah. That's here in Tehillim. It's also in a pasuk in Yechezkel. It says, Gam ani nasati et yadi. I raised my hand. I also raised my hand, lahem, to them, bamidbar, in the wilderness, la'afitzotam ba'goyim u'zarototam ba'aretzot, to scatter them among the nations. So here and in Yechezkel, it's also mentioned that part of the Gezerah against the people back then on the original Tisha B'Av was also that there would be a Golus. Okay, so you have here this idea that the Torah basically hid this second aspect of the punishment. There was a punishment that was then that generation. They would have to die out in the desert. And also in the future, there would be an exile. He says here, this second aspect was not explicit in the Torah, even though it was mentioned, the idea was already twice. It was in Bamidbar and Devarim. But it's here in the Psalms and in Yechezkel. Shelo litain makom l'rishei Yisrael amar. The point of this was that not to give the wicked ones among the Jews an opportunity to say, Shachurban kvar nigzar mirosh. Really, the destruction of the temple, the destruction of the Jewish Commonwealth, that was already what? Decreed way back when. And therefore, there is no utility, there's no purpose for repentance. Okay, they could say, it's not because we sinned in the times of the temple that the temple was destroyed and the Jewish people were taken to exile. because already, well before we had even entered the land of Israel, this had been decreed upon our ancestors for what they did wrong. And also, there's no reason for the rebuke of the Nevi'im in the times of the temple. That couldn't have saved us. It was already decreed. Actually, this touches on a much bigger question. If we have free will, how can we say that God knows what the future is going to be? If he already knows what's going to be, it's basically that's a way of saying that it's been predetermined in a matter of speaking. So what does it matter? We don't really have free will. Or the idea of Gzerak Duma Varatzon HaChofshi. So about primordial enactment or decree and free will. Okay, this is one deep philosophical question. So I like to also point out answers. The answer is, even if there is a Gzera of Gullus from the very beginning, even before the Jews entered the land of Israel, a year after the Exodus, they could always delay it. It could be pushed off, postponed indefinitely, as long as they would keep the Torah. Or you could say nothing stands in the way of tshuva. That first generation, yes, they're about to die. They're stuck in the land. But maybe just then and there was an opportunity for tshuva. They could have just immediately repented. We don't see that. We don't see that it happened enough. They first had to get, I guess, thoroughly smitten by the Canaanites and the Amalekites who lived in the south of the land of Israel when they tried to invade the place, and then they cried out to God. What they should have done is repented right away, but they did not do so. Nothing stands in the way of repentance. So that would be the latter generations. Yes, there was a Gzera of Gullus, but perhaps they could somehow get out of it by repenting or not sinning in the first place. So we have a question here. Dora Midbar basically got what they wanted. As I said before, Dora Midbar, they want to stay outside the land of Israel and not conquer the land. They didn't want to drive out the inhabitants. They didn't want to settle it. They disagreed with that whole plan. For whatever reason, it was impractical. Okay? It happens every generation. We hear echoes of the Raglan. What did the future generation do? Why would the future generation be punished for what Dora Midbar did? So we can offer that, and this is something that I think is a big musser. When that generation sinned, what did they get? What they had asked for. They didn't want to enter the land of Israel. They wanted to stay in outside the land of Israel. So they got that. Exactly. The future generation would be punished with what? Being scattered among the nations, sent to foreign lands. How is that midah keneged midah? Or how is that fitting for what they would allegedly do wrong? And the answer is, their crime would eventually be what? Imitating the nations. If you have Jewish people who take on imitating the nations, especially the worst aspects of their cultures and societies, so the punishment would be, fine, you can go there. Basically, if you like enlightened European culture or American degeneracy, well, then guess what? You're going to get your fill of American degeneracy and European enlightened progressive culture. You're going to get it. It's going to invade your country and make life difficult for you. And then eventually you'll be stuck in Chutz La'aretz, where you'll have way too much of it and it will oppress you. Okay? So that's basically the idea. Why Israel was punished with Gullus in this case. Why the psukim that mentioned us being scattered among the nations is the punishment that was in store for the future generation.